Okay, so we're going to take and we're going to talk about the goals of a control program and the components. There's lots to a control program, okay, as you probably are well aware. Education and outreach, here we go. You guys getting a message here? Education and outreach keeps coming up. Prevention, early detection, monitoring, rapid response, and eradication. Those are essential components of a control program. Also essential components of a AIS program as well. Okay, so the goals of a control program: trying to prevent new introductions of undesirable invasive species. That's good. Limiting the spread or eliminating populations of undesirable invasive species if they're already there, and reducing the harmful ecological, economic, social, and public health impacts resulting from infestation of undesirable invasive species. So those are essentially the goals of a control program. Okay, so how do we go about doing this? Again, here we go, education and outreach, prevention programs, early detection and monitoring, rapid response, and eradication. So we'll take and go into each of these in a little more detail with a focus on control. Education and outreach, number of programs. Again, we've seen this one before. AIS workshops, these type of workshops, we do these all throughout the state. Pass the word. People need to know what's going on so they can participate in the prevention. It's very important to realize that the public actually is the most important asset in a prevention program as well as a control program, okay? Number of programs there: Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers, Habitat again, Hunter from Meridian, Don't Move Muscle. I already went over these earlier in the day, okay? Prevention programs, again, early detection and monitoring for quagga zebra mussels. I already went into detail for that. Watercraft inspection and decontamination is critical. HACCP is important to have for your activities so you know what not to do and what to do. And then you also need to evaluate the risk of what your water body has, what could potentially happen, as well as the risks associated with any management or control actions you may wish to consider, okay? Rapid response, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, okay? In the case of Lake Piru and quagga mussels, rapid response is really not in the question at this point. It is, however, in the water body, Santa Clara River downstream, okay? Rapid response is still on the table for down below. So, what needs to happen? When developing rapid response plans, you need to take and develop multiple scenarios. You need to look at all possible outcomes, all possible things that you may find down below stream, okay? You also need to conduct a rapid response exercise. After you develop your plan, you need to practice, okay? So you know what to do, you know when to do it. Everybody that's involved in it knows what their role is, knows how they need to respond, okay? Just having a rapid response plan doesn't work unless all the players know what their role is and how to make things happen, okay? You then critique and modify your rapid response plan based on the training exercises that you do. You fine-tune it so it's ready to go. And you also need to stage resources that are adequate to respond to what you find out there, okay? You can't take and marshal a lot of resources if they're not available, okay? It's going to be very difficult to control something if you don't have the resources readily available within a matter of days to respond to an incident, okay? So it's very important to have these things in place. Eradication, okay? There's going to be a lot of conversation about eradication. We're going to try and get rid of these things, okay? Like I mentioned earlier, eradicating an aquatic invasive species from a water body is very, very rarely successful, okay? There's a number of ways to going about doing this. Biocontrol, okay? There's a product out in Equinox that they're working on. They've been working on it ever since the quagga mussels came to the west, trying to fine-tune the use of that. There's some issues with it. One of the big issues is they're finding that it's not a 100% kill. And there's a lot of concern that quagga mussels, being as plastic and resilient as they are, can actually develop a resistance to the use of this product if they survive an application of it. And then you become having similar to what we're dealing with medications and things like that. We're developing resistant strains of some type of bacteria and things of that nature. We're afraid that we may develop a resistant strain of quagga mussels that would be resistant to the use of Equinox. So they're still working on that one. So that's an option that's out there. We've also talked about suffocation using tarping or sedimentation within a reservoir, potash, things of that nature. You can deploy those type of things there. If you can do it in a way that would be effective, that might be a good way of maybe not eradicating them, but controlling them to keep the numbers down, okay? Water level fluctuations and DO manipulations, pulling the water way down, allowing water to become anoxic, killing them off that way, and then raising the water back up again. There's been some success with that in some reservoirs in Southern California. Municipal Water District down there has done that. They haven't eradicated them, but they've cut back some populations in some of their facilities that way. Chemical applications, we've kind of kicked around some chemical thoughts. That's a tough one. It requires a lot of work to put one in place that's going to be effective. A lot of things to consider, mainly the effects downstream, effects to not only the environment and the other organisms that are down there, but also the nature of things down below Lake Piru. Chemical applications going to be an issue for organic farmers, particularly if they're using that water. They'll probably wind up losing their certification if you take and do that type of application down there. And then physical removal. Just go out there, scrape them off, and haul them away. Okay, so those are some efforts at controlling and managing and eradicating quagga mussels. Kind of a toolbox. Again, like I say, it's a tough road to hoe, but you never know. This may be the first time we can do it if we're creative enough. Okay, so with that, any questions? Yes.
So this may be a question for United or maybe for Carrie, but Mike was showing that we don't have quagga mussels below the confluence yet. But once they get in the confluence or down into the main stem of the river, what are our treatment options? We've got steelhead in the river, and a lot of those methodologies don't seem like they would apply for a river situation. So we can do monitoring, and then we detect them, and then what do we do?
As far as what we can do down there, my response would be to try and isolate the area that you found them, and then try some type of non-toxic way of getting oxygen depletion, high water temperature, something like that, that would be localized, easy to contain, easy to control. That would be my suggestion.
Does it also depend on what your concern is? It's like United, we divert water to the Freeman diversion, and there are specific concerns that are associated with whether that water might be contaminated, so we're looking at putting in a treatment facility there for that specific concern. So, but if you're like biologists out doing surveys, obviously there's a different issue there as far as decontaminating your equipment and whatnot. So it really depends, I think, on what the specific concern is with respect to the quagga mussels. And we like to say if they get down there, not once. They're not there yet, so hopefully they never will be.
Yeah, there is.
In the context of this talk, though, is once you detect them, then you have all of these options here, but I don't see how those options apply in a river situation.
There's actually in the California Aquatic Invasive Species Management Plan, there is a rapid response scenario where they're looking at quagga mussels in like the Sacramento River or something like that, where they would take and go in, they would actually isolate with a dam, a type of isolation boom like they use for oil spills. They would isolate that particular area where they found it, and then would deplete oxygen or do a localized treatment, chemical treatment in that particular area, okay? So there are scenarios that have been looked at and things that can be applied locally. And I think, I need to double check that, but I think it's already been identified and there is a clause within CEQA laws that allows that to happen, but don't quote me on that one. I think that's already pre-staged and part of the rapid response program for the state of California. Carrie, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, all these ideas are great, and just literally doing hand removals can be quite effective. Keep in mind, not the whole water flow and the type of habitat are important. So you will likely see patches if they actually get down there. And knowing, if you know that information ahead of time, you know where to start monitoring.
So that would be something that would be looked at in developing a rapid response plan for the watershed. Look at possible scenarios of where we might find those and then what we could do about that. And then bring the state on board, the federal agencies on board, and make sure that they're all comfortable with it, and then get something in place where the buy-off is there, the permits and things are in place, so that when it does happen, all it takes is a phone call and then initiate the control. Okay.
I think I project.
For the tape.
You mentioned Equinox, and I might have missed it, but has the EPA approved Equinox for open waters yet? Or do you guys have any more information in the last 3 years as far as follow-up to their trials?
Yeah, I believe they have approved it, but I think there's issues.
So it's been approved in California for closed water systems, and I believe it's also been approved by EPA, Cal EPA, as well as California Department of Pesticide Regulation for closed systems. My last I've heard was that for open systems, it's still being evaluated. I do believe it's been approved by US EPA for open systems, but not yet for California.
So, control measures. What are we doing to control the quagga mussels at Lake Piru? First and foremost, Mike touched on it earlier in his discussions. Initially, we were doing quarterly dives. We've now increased that to bi-monthly at the recommendations of our TAC. So this year, we're slated to do 5 series of dives that are centered on mechanical removals, physical removals, and additional monitoring while they're down doing the removals. They're also collecting data, doing a quantitative analysis and population density and disbursement assessments of the mussels in the reservoir, so we can increase our monitoring efforts and kind of improve upon what we know about what's currently going on in the reservoir. We just finished a quarterly or bi-monthly dive in July. We're preparing for the next one in September, middle of September. The dives currently involved anywhere from 6 to 10 divers in the last 4 days, roughly 4 days. And we are scraping mussels off of key locations: our water treatment plant intake system, our marina docks, our courtesy boat launch docks where people launch their boats, our floating restrooms, and some of the more critical infrastructure in the reservoir. Each of the last 3 dive system or series that we've done, the 4-day dives, they've removed around 7,000 to 8,000 pounds of mussels in each of those 4 days. It's really labor intensive. It takes a long time. Imagine yourself in 2 feet of water upside down with a paint scraper and scuba gear trying to scrape the bottom of a dock that has grooves and nooks and crannies and algae, and they're swimming about. It's a lot of time, and the deeper you go, obviously the dive times get shorter, and so it's a lot of work. And then in addition, on the top side, it's a lot of work. We have to take all those mussels, freeze them, then take the frozen mussels, crush them with a tractor, and then bury them in a spoils pile so that they don't get sent out. The oxygen deprivation via tarping, as you heard earlier, we did a pilot program where we deployed tarps at 2 locations in the reservoir. Not my idea of fun. 25 foot by 75 foot long tarps that are very thick and heavy. Takes a lot of divers, there's a lot of risk and a lot of safety, and unfortunately Piru doesn't have the luxury of a nice sloping embankment. We have vertical walls. So our divers had to go in with sand anchors and pneumatic tools and anchor the tarps to the rock sides and then try to get that so that the wave action didn't allow oxygen to come in, and it was a lot of work. It got good results, but it's very labor intensive. And as me, the guy who's in charge of it, I was about ready to have a stroke because I was afraid somebody wouldn't make it back. Exit inspections, we've talked about that a little bit. We will be implementing exit inspections on all boats leaving the reservoir. They will sign an affidavit, as I mentioned, saying that they'll go through that. And if they don't, we'll be issuing them citations, etc., contacting Fish and Wildlife. Decontamination. Currently, our management plan calls for only boats that have been in the water for more than 96 hours, meaning boats that would be potentials to have mussels settle out on them would go through decontamination. Although at the recommendation of our TAC, we are exploring that and working towards trying to come up with the resources and the staffing and the funding to potentially decontaminate all boats leaving the reservoir. As you'll see outside today when we go in the afternoon session, we do have a decontamination station that we purchased. It's a trailer mounted unit. It has varying water temperatures from 80 to 240 degrees at 4,000 PSI. You'll see our patrol boat that's out there, we pressure washed it, so you can kind of get the sense of what it can and cannot do. Again, labor intensive. We've also applied for a grant with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife folks for some funding to help us with this effort, for some staff to go through that process. And then our TAC is continuing to discuss the biocontrol measures. As Dr. Culver mentioned earlier, we did have a pilot program using red ear perch and bluegill. Because of the number of fish and the availability of fish, we couldn't really come up with whether or not it was an effective program. And then potential future control measures. We continue to talk to the folks at Marone Bioinnovations, who are the people who are developing Equinox. Initially, when we first went out and we discovered we had quaggas and we approached them on this, the cost to use for a one-time application, depending upon the water level, from minimum pool, meaning if we drain the lake below the intake tower, to a full reservoir, varied anywhere from $40 million to about $400 million for a one-time chemical application. So I'm told that that number has come down quite a bit, but even if you cut the $40 million in half and it was $20 million, our annual operating budget's only 19, so you can imagine the financial strain that that would have, and how do you come up with $20 million and then not have to guarantee that it's going to work. Here's some examples of what our divers have been doing. As you can see, they're underneath our water treatment system that we use to pump water out of the reservoir for the drinking water in the park, scraping that. Every 2 months they're going down and they're scraping this off. What we have found, which is some good news in our last dive removal, is that the size classifications are much smaller, meaning that by doing the removals, we're keeping up with getting the adult mussels, the breeding mussels, out of the water and keeping that number down as a management and control effort. So that's good news. This is an example of our equipment decontamination, and I'd like to touch about that a little bit. One of the biggest things that we're really having to do is reevaluate how we do business at Lake Piru. Every piece of equipment, from a scrub brush to a bulldozer, has to go through a decontamination if it comes in contact with mud, water, etc. We've even kicked around the idea of buying separate equipment for different facilities within the water district, such as a water truck, because the cost it takes to decontaminate that piece of equipment. This is an example of when we did our dives recently. This is a saltwater solution that the divers are required to put all their gear in and dunk it and go through a rinsing system and brushing system where they decontaminate their equipment. This is how we're removing the mussels from the reservoir. You got a diver in the water, he or she scrapes the mussels. They have this trash pump hooked up to a suction hose. As they scrape the mussels, they're sucking them up. They're pumped topside into these bins or 55-gallon drums where they're stored. We take them and freeze them, crush them, bury them, so that they're not scraping them and letting them fall to the bottom of the reservoir, because by doing that, you're providing substrate for new mussels to attach to. So they have to be physically completely removed from the reservoir. And also, it says suction pump. This is actually an airlift. We use an oxygen tank at the top side, pump the water down, it creates a reverse vacuum and sucks the mussels up. So this was done down near our Santa Felicia Dam rock face. The diver was in about 50 feet of water at the time, scraping the mussels and sucking it to the top side. At the end of this PVC pipe is a collection bag that the mussels were collected in. When the bag gets full, you remove it, store it, and again, the same process. As you can see, because of the cobbly, rocky substrate, it's really hard to get the mussels removed. You can get the flat surface areas, but in all these rocks and grooves and crevices, with the visibility that we have in Piru, it's almost virtually impossible to get in there and get some of the mussels out. One other thing I'd like to touch on is, what I talk about is changing how we do business at Piru. Everything from fighting wildland fires. We've entered into MOUs with the fire departments who, when there's a fire, they don't call and ask permission to come and take our water. They say, hey, we're coming to get water. Public safety trumps needing permission, and they fly in. So what we've done is we've drafted MOUs with the Forest Service, the Ventura County Fire, and Los Angeles County Fire, who frequently take water from the reservoir, and ask them to sign into this MOU that says that before they go to another body of water, after they use their watercraft, their fire trucks, their tankers, any firefighting equipment, fixed-wing aircraft, etc., that they will agree to go through the decontamination processes set in place by the U.S. Forest Service. I believe it's referenced as the Intermountain Regional Decontamination Efforts. And to date, Ventura County Fire has signed that MOU, and we have an effective MOU with Ventura County Fire. LA County has indicated that it would likely take significant waiting time because of legal review that they have to go through. Callegas is also in the process with LA County, and Forest Service is pretty confident they should have something back to us very soon. So there's a lot more to go into it other than just the boats or the equipment leaving the reservoir. It's much bigger than that, and at Piru we have the challenge of not only the boats and the water leaving the reservoir, you got to think of the things that fly in, the airplanes, the helicopters, those kind of things, your own equipment. You wear boots, patrol officers. I can't wear the same equipment that I wear at the lake now when I go down to El Rio and I'm working around the creek. So now the cost of everything goes up because everybody has to have two of everything. That's it.